So next let us discuss about polity. Rice?
The rice can be easily linked to the more complexity of the society. For example, if rice, more population, more agriculture, more surplus, then more complexity.
मगध कहाँ था? कॉम्प्लेक्स सोसाइटी. ठीक है, सब कुछ तो कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी उधर से ही निकलती है, इधर तो चीजें फिर भी सिंपल है. एनीवेज दिस इज अगेन नॉट हिस्टोरिकल, राइट? Anyways, right, let us discuss the polity. Now, I'll be starting dealing with some intense topics, right? So, be very, sincere for these classes, right? Once you discuss about polity, right? Chiefdom is a different thing, right? Chiefdom is a different thing. And state is a different thing, right? Chiefdom, I just told you, chiefdom is all about a hierarchical society, right? Hierarchy between some person has been given the status of elite, right, and rest of the people has been considered as commoners, right? So that kind of hierarchy could be seen in society. For chiefdom, the powers are not playing very important role. That fellow who is who is assigned or who has been given the post of chief, he is not a very powerful kind of person. So normally in the chiefdom society, the person who is enjoying power, he is basically having certain ritual rights because of what? He is claiming certain powers. Getting my point or not? For the chiefdom, in a chiefdom society, the person who is ruling or who is supposed to be the chief is not supposed to show his power to rest of the people to come into power or to avail that post, right? But these kind of ideas cannot be implied for the state society. In state society, if somebody is king, right, it might be possible that he is, even though he is taking the help of the religion to get the power, right, but it doesn't mean that is the only source of power for that fellow, right? In state system, there are so many other factors because of what that fellow has been declared as ruler, right? So when we talk about state system, so that is altogether different from the chiefdom society, right? So as I discussed about the Chalcolithic society, and I told you that the Chalcolithic society definitely was a chiefdom society, but it could not convert into a state society until and unless certain preconditions were available, right? So once you talk about state systems, so now as we have started for the first time, we have started discussing about the serious polity, right? So once you have started discussing about the polity seriously, so let us first try to understand what kind of features must be there in a state society, right? So I just told you that in IVC there were few conditions. If those conditions are not present, you can't say that the society is having society is having any kind of state structure or not, right? So once you talk about state, right, so definitely in the state those conditions that I must discuss. State society. So the first condition that there should be a king. राजा तो होता है, राजा नहीं होगा तो काम कैसे चलेगा? ठीक है, राजा है. But when you are talking about a king, whenever you are talking about a king, right, it means that he must be king of आर्मी का कोई राजा होता है क्या? आर्मी के साथ राजा होता है, किसी स्टेट का राजा होगा. So yes, he is actually suggesting the right thing. Whenever you talk about king, it means that suppose I just told you about Chandragupta. So how can you define Chandragupta? That Chandragupta was a ruler of Magad or India. That is the definition, or in that way only he'll try to introduce Chandragupta, right? Who was Samudragupta. Samudragupta was one of the Gupta ruler ruling on India, right? Or he was ruler of India. He is ruler of Sri Lanka or China or Britain. That is why. Have you ever said that he is ruler of us? ऐसा नहीं बोलते ना, और ही इज रूलर ऑफ पीपल, ऐसा भी नहीं बोलते हैं, ठीक है। हम हमेशा बोलते हैं कि वो किसी जगह का राजा होता है, ठीक है। ऐसे आदमी तो दिल का भी राजा हो सकता है, दैट्स अ डिफरेंट कंसेप्ट, ठीक है। मोस्ट ऑफ आवर बॉलीवुड हीरोज आर लाइक दिल का राजा, ठीक है, अंदर से फक्कड़। Territory, right? So this is the second important condition for the state. Whenever you discuss about the state without territory, you can't discuss about a king, right? So look, these two conditions, yes, there is a king, and after the king the territory is important, and then third, the Raja. Whenever, as I told you, that whenever you imagine a king, that king is always powerful, that king is always powerful, and powers are lying in two different factors, and these are money and legitimacy, okay, money and manpower, ठीक है, okay, fine. Without taxation system you cannot imagine a Raja, because that taxation is somehow getting him the money power, right? And with the help of that money, what happens? With the help of that money, ultimately he is capable of controlling the state, right? And that is where this money is very important. And if he is having money, and taxation is also very important, right? You must need to understand taxation, right? I think I might have discussed earlier also. What is this taxation? Why do we feel the need of tax? आप कभी शौक से टैक्स देते हैं क्या? टैक्स हमेशा हम रोक के ही देते हैं. We never prefer to. I think George is liking paying. He likes paying taxes. नहीं. Have you seen a single person who is very happy while giving the taxes? There might be few, like अंधभक्त and all. मोदी ने कह दिया अगर तो हम डबल टैक्स दे देंगे इस पर. ऐसे कुछ लोग हो सकते हैं, ठीक है, और बाद में रोएंगे. Normally we all never like paying taxes, ठीक है. Then what happened suddenly that they became paying the tax, they became ready to pay the taxes to the राजा, और वो राजा बैठ के मतलब टैक्स कलेक्ट करेगा और हम देंगे उसको. इतना आसान तो नहीं है. Security purpose. Rituals, that is in chiefdom society. Once you're talking about anything which is ritual or religious, that is feature of chiefdom society. ठीक है. Once we are discussing about state, so for state it's power, right? So it is, if I am having power, right, and I started collecting the tax from you, that is not called tax, that is called hafta. उसको हम टैक्स नहीं बोलते हैं, ठीक है. तो सिर्फ पावर के बल पे आप टैक्स नहीं देते हैं. एग्रीमेंट, एक म्यूचुअल अग्रीमेंट होता है किसके किसके बीच में, रूलर के बीच में और टैक्स पेयर के बीच में, ठीक. हाँ, नहीं होता है, ऐसा होता है, बिल्कुल होता है. आपने रिटर्न फाइल किया, यू हैव फाइल्ड द रिटर्न, राइट, एंड यू डिक्लेयर्ड योर इनकम, एंड देन you agreed to pay that amount of tax, right? That is the agreement. That form, the return that you are filing, that is the agreement, right? So you're signing an agreement. Now the question is there, what was we are definitely discussing the historical factors, right? So why did the people become ready? Because in society so far nobody was collecting taxes. In a chiefdom society there might be tribute, but definitely not the taxes, right? If taxes are not there, right, so definitely there might be some reason for the beginning of the taxation system. ऐसा तो हुआ नहीं हुआ कि एक दिन हमें सपना आया तो खर्चा उसको चाहिए, ठीक है, तो आप क्यों देंगे? हाँ,
वो लोग किंग्स एक्सपेक्ट कर रहे हैं, आपने सिक्योरिटी प्रोवाइड करिए, बदले में हम आपको
कुछ देंगे. किस चीज की सिक्योरिटी? आपके पास लूटने के लिए है क्या? Surplus जब आएगा, ठीक है. Now you are coming to the right direction. Look, initially the surplus is not there in the society, but once the surplus comes into the society, and mind you, surplus, you can't underestimate the power of surplus. Surplus, right? Surplus is actually marking very, very important changes in society, and the surplus is not only marking the positive changes, negative changes as well, right? So suppose you are a farmer, you have started farming the land, and because of your technology, initially you were just cultivating 100 kgs of your farm. And I just told you, by extending land, if you are, it was not possible although, right, that you can't extend your land until and unless you are getting some support, manpower, right. So it was not possible. So basically you could have cultivated the same land, but if you would have applied few technologies in your land, in that case you could have increase the productivity, and as a result you could have got some amount of surplus, right. So okay, now the surplus is there. So you just imagine that initially we were just producing 100 kg, and suppose I'm just talking about my story only. I'm producing 100 kg only, and in this 100 kg I have, suppose I have a small family, I have 2 wives and 4 children, right. So the total family is, पुराने जमाने में polygamy चलता था यार, ठीक है. So suppose I have 2 wives and 4 children, right. So 7 members, right. And you just imagine कि this 100 kgs are just sufficient to feed my family for the coming year, right. And maybe I'll just get something, or I'll left with something which may be used as seeds, right, for the next year, right. So that is the surplus. But somehow what happened, due to some changed technology and the weather condition and land, due to any reason, ultimately now I have started producing 200 kgs, right. So once I have started producing 200 kgs, so does it mean that now me and my family would consume all the 200 kgs? Maybe 110 kg, 120 kg, ठीक है. अगर बच्चे थोड़े खाने वाले हुए तो 120 kg, ठीक है. What about that 80 kgs, right? So now I'm just left with 80 kgs. And suppose if the process is repeated for coming 2-3 years, in that case I'll be left with around 250 kgs, right? So now that 250 kg would be sufficient for me and my family for coming 3 years. For if I'm not cultivating my land for coming 3 years, I won't be having or facing any problem. But he is not liking this idea. He thought कि यार उसके पास तो इतना है, मेरे पास नहीं है, चुरा लेते हैं आज रात में उसको. आइडियाज तो आ सकते हैं ना, आइडियाज तो आ सकते हैं, ठीक है. What actually trying to convey you that surplus is not only getting positive changes in the society, negative changes as well in society. And whenever that surplus is coming, there are so many people sitting with in search of right opportunity only. यार उसके पास है, किस तरीके से निकाला जाए उसको. कुछ लोग यही दिमाग लगाते हैं, ठीक है. हाँ ये है, कॉमन है. तो मैं तो वही बात कर रहा हूँ जो होता है समाज में. आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग एनीथिंग व्हिच इज नॉट हैपनिंग इन द सोसाइटी. वी आर रीडिंग अबाउट सोसाइटी ओनली ना. सो व्हेनेवर यू आर हैविंग सरप्लस, you have lots of positive things, because the development which is coming in the society, that is just because of surplus. But at the same time you cannot ignore that, once you talk about development, what kind of development? You imagine religion, or you come up with the religion, you talk about music, dance, or sort of any other creativity, that is just because of surplus. Because if you are struggling for your survival, right, you won't be coming up with any sort of creativity. दिमाग जब खाली नहीं होगा तो creativity नहीं होगी. But once you have some surplus, that simultaneously brings certain negativity in the society. So yes, with the surplus, some negative forces are also there. Now, the negative forces could be very organized also, right? Negative forces could be very organized also. आपको पता भी नहीं चलेगा और आपसे सरप्लस लेके चले जाएंगे, ठीक है. कैसे लेके चले जाएंगे सरप्लस? जो ब्राह्मण्स ने बोला कि ब्राह्मण्स दे गॉट अ डिफरेंट कंसेप्ट कि लोग नहीं, ये तो बहुत बात की बात है. अल्टीमेटली व्हाट इज द लाइफ, द मेन एजेंडा ऑफ लाइफ? साल्वेशन. हाउ डू यू गेट द साल्वेशन? यू हैव टू परफॉर्म ritual, right? And if you're performing ritual, that is not going to be conducted free. There is a charge for you. And this question was asked in the UPSC mains examination, that yagnas were nothing but the means of social exchanges. Discuss. This question has been asked. This is the meaning of this question, right? Ki yagnas are nothing. Normally we find it is about religion and etc. and etc. It is nothing about religion here. It is basically there is a planned way to grab your surplus. Getting my point or not? It's a planned way to grab your surplus, right? So now they came up with those kind of ideas. Why? Because he is not part of mode of production and he never wants to be part of the mode of production. And without doing all such kind of things, without working on the farm, without being participant in the craft practices, he just wanted to get the things in a more organized way, right? And he grabbed the surplus from our society. right? And this question has been asked. I'm not, मैं मजाक कर रहा हूँ, आपको लग रहा होगा ऐसा नहीं है, ठीक है? So somehow, I hope you are getting my point. So once that surplus is coming, so there were so many negative things are coming also, right? So once any thief is coming, any person who is trying to loot us, such kind of elements are coming, right? So definitely we needed security. But something which is more important than security, it is not always about security, because once property is there, once I have something which is valuable, right? So disputes are also coming into the society. झगड़ा तो 3 चीज के लिए होता ही है. जमीन, jar is movable property, Jameen is unmovable property, and Joru is most valuable property, right? So this is the most valuable property, and I'll discuss it कि why women were considered as property. मजाक में मत लीजिए हर चीज को, मैं जो भी बोलता हूँ मजाक कुछ नहीं होता उसमें, आप ले लो वो अलग बात है, ठीक है? So women, there is a phase which is coming when women were considered as property, right? And that is where this kind of slangs are coming into use, ki like jar, joru and jameen, right? But at least you don't understand just joru, fine, right? At least jar and jameen you can understand, right? So fine. Once dispute started, so then you needed the help of a third person, the person who can sort out your disputes, right? And the person who can provide the security to you, right? And then what you did actually, you just choose someone. You yourself choose someone, right, to do these kind of functions, and finally we choose him. Okay, fine, you just do this kind of work, these kind of works. Then he said कि मैं पागल हूँ, ठीक है? तो ये बोलेगा कि मैं अब तुम खेती करो, ठीक है? तुम 100 kgs जोड़ो, 200 kgs जोड़ो, 400 kgs जोड़ो, और मैं तुम्हें सिक्योरिटी प्रोवाइड करने के लिए अपना खेती छोड़ दूँ, ठीक है? Then we बोल कि यार ये तो बात लॉजिकल है. Then what exactly we said? Okay, fine, you just do one thing, right? You just do this function, right? And every year we'll be giving you something, right? We will be giving you something, right? And then he said कि यार ये भी ठीक है यार, ठीक है, बैठे बैठे काम करना पड़ेगा, ठीक है? Finally हो गया, चले. And finally he became the ruler, right? Once he became the ruler, right? And then some other processes are also coming up, right? So we agreed to pay the tax to him, right? But for this year, I didn't have any fight with anybody, right? And there was no asset security threat as well. Next year also, I faced the same sort of thing. And then I started thinking, what is the point of paying tax to him, right? मेरा झगड़ा भी नहीं होता किसी से, ठीक है? मेरा किसी से कोई चोर भी नहीं आता मेरे घर में, तो इसका फायदा क्या है? Then next year I stopped paying the tax. Then he got disturbed. कि अरे इस साल इसके घर से तो टैक्स नहीं आया, ठीक है? तो फिर ये क्या करेगा? आदमी भेजेगा, ठीक है? तो इसका मतलब इसके पास आदमी चाहिए, ठीक है? टैक्सेशन तो स्टार्ट हो गया. Taxation has already started. I just told you, and in fact, while I just told you about taxation, so I hope you might have heard about the famous principle or theory by Rousseau, social contract. Social contract, right? What is this social contract? This is what I am telling you. This is social contract. ठीक है? हम खुद तैयार होते हैं टैक्स देने के लिए, हम अपने ऊपर बिठाते किसी का, आओ बैठो बैठो हमारे ऊपर, ठीक है? टैक्स लो हमसे, ठीक है? So that is social contract. Normally there was a concept of divinity for the state, right? कि kings are having divine powers, right? And that is why the king was very close to religion, because that legitimacy, what you were talking about just now, that legitimacy was basically the Brahmins or any priestly class. It is not only true for India. The same is true for Europe also. So if you think Europe was very advanced, during the medieval period, nobody was advanced actually. They all were having the same kind of system, right? So in fact, even in Europe or France, church was very close to the state. The first state, second state and third state, right? The categories of the people. So the first state, the religious classes were there. In the second state, the ruling classes were there, and they were very close. And याद रखिएगा, हमेशा दोनों में पटती बहुत है दोनों में. क्यों? दोनों साथ रहेंगे, गब्बर और सांबा साथ रहेंगे, तभी तो उसको जय और वीरू को लूटेंगे, ठीक है? तो इन दोनों में पटती हमेशा बहुत है, right? So somehow this closeness is a very generalistic feature of society, right? But I'm not discussing about that closeness right now. What I told you that, and in fact, that priestly class always claimed the divine powers for the king. That fellow is having certain divine rights, and that is why he is ruling on you, right? And we people accepted कि okay, ठीक है भाई, he must be having these divine rights, right? And we accepted those kind of things, which is known as mental hegemony, mental hegemony, right? So in the name of religion, they would have created the mental hegemony, right? And just because of that mental hegemony, we accepted that. But once people started challenging this, right? So there must be some theoretical background of this, and the person like Rousseau is coming and he is saying, okay, what is state? State is a social contract. So if you imagine the state as a religious body, if you imagine the state as somebody who has, already who already having such kind of rights, and that is why he is ruling over us, and that is why the state is sitting over us, that's a wrong concept of state. And that is why he is giving the idea of social contract. The state is basically choose or created by the people itself, right? And they can't rule over the people, although it is happening. They are ruling over us, right? And they have created a sort of mental hegemony actually, right? State always does this. मेंटल हेजिमनी अलग अलग तरीके से क्रिएट कर सकते हैं. एंटोनियो ग्राम्सी को जानते हैं? एंटोनियो ग्राम्सी, यू मस्ट बी नोइंग. एंटोनियो ग्राम्सी एक फिलोसोफर थे, ठीक है, और बेचारा ज्यादातर टाइम जेल में ही रहते हैं वो, ठीक है. वो जेल में ही शायद मर ही जाते हैं, मुझे ठीक से याद नहीं है अभी, मैं भूल गया हूँ. उसने एक डायरी लिखी थी, ठीक है. मरने के बाद वो डायरी जो है पब्लिश हुई. पब्लिश होने के बाद उसने जो है ये जो सबॉल्टन मैं बोलता हूं ना, ये सबॉल्टन का आइडिया उसी ने दिया था, ठीक है, रामसी. उसने क्या कहा था? उसने कहा था कि देखिए दो तरीके के लोग हैं इस दुनिया में. देयर आर टू कैटेगरीज ऑफ पीपल कुड बी सीन इन दिस वर्ल्ड. वन विच इज रूलिंग एंड वन विच इज बीइंग रूल्ड. एंड डू यू नो वन थिंग? ओनली 2% पीपल आर रूलिंग ऑन रेस्ट ऑफ द 98%. हाउ इज इट पॉसिबल? हाउ इज इट पॉसिबल? इज इट पॉसिबल विद द हेल्प ऑफ फोर्स और पावर? आपको लगता है कि 2% लोग जो है 98% लोग को जो है दबा के रख सकते हैं? एंड इसीलिए यू मस्ट रिमेंबर वन थिंग, व्हेनेवर पीपल आर रिवोल्टिंग, दैट becomes revolution, right? Because it changed everything. And why we people always say that in India there's a revolution required, right? Because in India normally the Indian people are very sort of, yeah, they are very peaceful, adaptive nature. ठीक है, ठीक है. So until unless once the citizens they became aware of the facts, right, or they just got conscious of their rights and some other things, they'll actually overturn everything. They had this potential, and that is why if you imagine that the state is ruling over us in the name of power or with the help of power, that's a wrong concept, right? I'm just giving you a small example. I hope you have seen army jawans, right? In fact, in India, you'll find that army jawans are in greater number, and there are very less number of officers, 2% or 3% officers, and less are jawans only, right? That jawan has been recruited. To fight on the border, but that jawan is actually polishing the boot of his officer. Do you know that or not? That jawan is washing clothes, doing the press, right? Gardening, खाना भी बना रहे हैं. उसको वो तो जब जवान दौड़ वड़ के आया था, बोला था यार जय हिंद जय भारत करते हुए कि अभी देश का रक्षा. उधर जाके पता चला यार ये तो यही करना है, हमें बूट पॉलिश करना है, खाना बनाना है. बट हैव यू एवर सीन दैट ही इज रेजिंग हिज वॉइस अगेंस्ट दिस? हैव यू एवर सीन दैट ही इज सेइंग कि नो आई वोंट डू दिस? नो, ही नेवर सेज लाइक दैट, राइट? व्हाई? बिकॉज देयर इज अ मेंटल हेजेमनी हैज बीन क्रिएटेड, राइट? एंड he has been trained in such a way that he always accepts such kind of things कि I am meant of this only, I have to do this kind of works. इसीलिए कहते हैं कि जवानों से पैर इतना पटकाया जाता है कि उसके दिमाग जो है वहां से जाते 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 यहाँ घुटने तक आ जाता है, ठीक है, सोच नहीं सकते. मतलब इट्स सॉर्ट ऑफ गलत चीज है, लेकिन ये होता है. इट इज नॉट अबाउट दैट, ये तो गलत चीज है. इट इज ए सॉर्ट ऑफ मेंटल हेजेमनी व्हिच हैज बीन क्रिएटेड. आपको क्या लगता है? मैं कई बार बोलता हूँ ये मोदी गवर्नमेंट के बारे में या इन चीजों के बारे में बोलता हूँ, आपको क्या लगता है वो क्या कर रहे हैं? व्हाई दे आर टॉकिंग अबाउट हिंदुइज्म? इट्स ए sort of it's an idea through which they could create that mental hegemony. Yes, both when they are talking about Hinduism, who the bloody hell should talk about Hinduism right now? We must talk about economic development, we must talk about the unemployment, we must talk about some other issues, but we people have started talking about Hinduism. हिंदू खतरे में, हिंदू खतरे में. अरे कहां से खतरे में हो जाएगा यार हिंदुइज्म? जबरदस्ती वाली बात है. बट बात कर रहे हैं ना लोग आज, हिंदुइज्म खतरे में है. कहां से खतरे में हो जाएगा? 25% 75% Hindus है इस country में. How is it possible to call Hindus they are in danger, right? But they are saying कि Hindus are in danger. पता नहीं, मुझे तो आज तक नहीं समझ में आया. ठीक है. हाँ? उससे क्या फर्क पड़ता है? You can't compare them. That is why we are reading history, ना? That is, once Muslim came, they were minority, they were ruling in majority, but did they convert all the people into Muslim? No, no. That's a different thing. Ruling communities are always different. That hardly matters, right? They never force the people, or they never compel the people to convert into Muslim. We'll discuss that, conversion. We'll discuss the conversion of, conversion into Islam, right? That topic is there in our course, right? I'll talk about that, right? So somehow these kind of topics are just used to create the mental hegemony, right? And state always does this. वो मेंटल, और मैं बीजेपी के लिए नहीं बोल रहा हूँ सिर्फ, ठीक है, हर वो पार्टी यही करती है. कोई आम आदमी का ना बहाना लेता है, ठीक है, वी आर द रियल फाइटर्स, वी आर द रियल सपोर्टर ऑफ द कॉमन मैन, वोट फॉर अस, ठीक है. वो क्रिएट कर दिया एक मेंटल हेजेमनी, यार यही है बंदा वो, ठीक है, जो निकालेगा हमें यहाँ से. वोट कर दिया, वो बंदा पता चला 60 लाख की दारू पी गया, ठीक है. So these are nothing but just to create the mental hegemony, right? So whenever you talk about state, right, state always tries to create that mental hegemony in the name of anything, right? It may be religion, it may be what Ashoka did. Do you think that Ashoka was a very nice and kind-hearted person? No, he was also trying to create a different kind of mental hegemony, right? So they all were trying for this only. ठीक है, सब के बारे में हम डिस्कस कर सकते हैं, कुशानस के बारे में डिस्कस कर सकते हैं, वी कैन टॉक अबाउट गुप्ता. दे ऑल हैड डिफरेंट स्टाइल टू क्रिएट द हेजेमनी. अशोका, व्हाट अशोका सेड, ऑल द सब्जेक्ट पॉपुलेशन आर माय चिल्ड्रन, राइट? और बाप को, बेटे को बाप की बात सुननी चाहिए. क्यों? क्योंकि मैं तुम्हारे वेलफेयर में बात कर रहा हूं. तो मतलब the whole subject population must listen Ashoka. Whatever Ashoka is saying, that should be listened to. Why? Because he is like a father, figure. He is like a father figure, and whatever Ashoka is saying, that is for the welfare of the subject population, right? So that is again to create a mental hegemony. So look, state, whenever state is there, right? State always comes, always try to create such kind of hegemony, right? And then only the state could survive for a longer period, right? So the policies and some other things, these are nothing but the mean of creating such kind of hegemony, right? So when you talk about this, state system, so definitely after the taxation system, as I told you, that what is happening, that army is not, required just to control the subject population, but yes, as those few refractory elements, and the person like, me, as I'm not ready to pay the taxes, in that case, what he did actually, he, with the help of the tax, what I paid to him, paid to the state, he started having a regular standing army, right? So fine, that army is also becoming one of the important part of the state, right? And now, when this army is coming into existence, right, and the army is recruited, so now if I deny to pay the taxes, that is going to be illegal, I could be imprisoned, right? And the army is coming and they could force us to pay the tax, right? If I am not paying, you know the outcomes of the result, right? So now army has come, but the things are not stopping here, the things are not ending here, right? This is merely the beginning, this is merely the beginning, but in the in the absence of any of the factor, you cannot talk about a state. Got my point? Right. So somehow, if these components are there, then only you can imagine a state, right? And as I told you that for the legitimacy, they are using various things. So for the legitimacy, initially what was used by them? Religion, right? That they, claim the divine right, through that priestly class. This people is ruling because he had certain right. So they have created this legitimacy. So that could also be discussed. If somehow all these things could not get you the legitimacy, right? Ultimately, you need some other means, policies, right, to get the legitimacy. So the fifth thing that could be discussed is legitimacy. ये कैमरे में आ रहा है ना ये सब, ठीक है? So legitimacy. So these 5 angles are or aspects are very important to understand the state system. And whenever we need to discuss about state, any of the questions related to state, either you talk about, Mauryan state, you talk about Gupta state, you talk about Mughal state, or you talk about any of the states, right? Ultimately, these are the key features of the state, right? So whenever you are writing any answer, you have to revolve around this, right? Anyways, ठीक है, हम वापस आते हैं अपने मुद्दे पे. So I hope you got the point कि what is the significance of these factors. So whenever you are talking about state, we need to discuss ultimately about these things, right? So now let us try to imply these ideas on early Vedic period and later Vedic period, right? So now, if you are talking about early Vedic period, so the first king, this term is definitely there in Rig Veda, right? A Rajan term has been referred many times in Rig Veda, right? So does it mean that if Rajan has been referred, so does it mean that there was a proper state system during the early Vedic period? Now let us try that. Let us try to evaluate that. So the second thing I just told you, first thing is available. The second thing I told you, Rajan, right? Territory, right? So now, if we will talk about territory, or if we'll try to discuss about territory, right? So let us try to understand some of the terms refer in Rig Veda. In Rig Veda, or we can talk about these two different terms, Jan and Janpada, right? Jan means and Janpad means land, right? Jan has been referred 275 times, right, in Rig Veda, but not a single reference of Janpada, right? So I hope the idea is very clear. It means that land was not important to them. I hope you might have heard about so many terms. In fact, there was another thing that we must discuss earlier. Whenever you talk about the Rig Vedic society, you will find Aryans, Dasas, and Dasyus, right? So basically we need to discuss about Aryans. So Aryans were basically a tribal form of community that we discussed, more or less, we have discussed about that. It was tribal form of community, and the tribal form of community are always known as per the name of that tribe rather than the territory, right? So you might have heard about the terms like Kuru, Panchal, or such as Turvas, Dhruvu, right? So these were the names of tribal communities. They had nothing to do with the area or the land. These were simply about people, right? So whatever the Rajan that we do know in Rig Veda, he was nothing but the head of that particular clan, because the territory is not important. So basically somebody is Rajan of Panchal tribal community, somebody is head of of Kuru tribal community, right? So basically that idea was dominant, and that is why we don't find that the term Janpad has been given any sort of significance during in Rig Veda. It is only the Jan which has been signified, right? So it means that was also not present, right? Okay, fine. So if we say okay, fine, this is also not there, Janpad is also not there, and only Jana is there, it means the first condition is not being fulfilled, right? Coming to the next, taxation system. So if we'll talk about taxation system, so we'll find a term. That term is Bali. So what was this Bali? So Bali is basically a sort of tribute which was being paid to the chief, right? Which is known as Rajan, right? But we can call him chief, right? So that tribute which was paid to the the Rajan, right? And the tribute was voluntary. So if I am willing to pay something to the head or the chief, I will, otherwise I won't, right? So this is not tax, this is tribute. And I just told you about the chiefdom societies, that it is the tribute, it is not the tax which is being paid to the state, right? So the Bali is the term which has been referred, right? And the fourth is army, right? So before I come to army, look, if you talk about army, so the taxation system is very much required. The state is capable of having a regular standing army only if the state is having income, right? And that income of state is only through taxation, right? If the taxation is not present, so of course the army also cannot be discussed here, right? So there is no army, but we do know about classes. The classes which took place because of cattles. Normally the cattle raids used to take place in Vedic societies, right? इसकी गाय उसने छीन ली, उसकी गाय इसने छीन ली, बस यही था इनका, ठीक है? और गाय छीनने में मस्त रहते थे वो, ठीक? गाय छीनने में मस्त रहते थे. क्यों गाय? Why we are giving so much importance to cow? Because most of the terms, right, in Rigvedic society would be, is basically of cows, right? Beti, daughter, is known as Duhita. Evening is known as Godhuli. Morning is known as Godum, right? Gavistu, right? Or Gohanta, guests are known as Gohanta. So most of the terms of the early Vedic period revolving around cow. So at least one thing, and I have already told you in the economy, it was a pastoralist society. Why it is considered to be a pastoralist society? Because cow is the most valuable property to them. And in fact, we have numbers of references which are proving this idea that cow used to be the valuable property to them, right? So if cow is very valuable property to them, and normally we'll find cattle raids. So in those kind of cattle raids, we'll find that ultimately every member of the clan used to participate. Every member. I am just talking about the male adult males, right? So if the strength of the tribal community is 100, so maybe 50 adult males, right? And so those 50 used to participate, but it was not army, because they were not getting salary for this work, right? And that is why you can't compare it with the army. That could be called as a tribal force or the tribal army, right? So that is also not present. So if all such things are not present here, so can you say that they had this condition, they have reached to that status, right, or condition where it could be said that there was any state existing during this early Vedic period or among these tribal communities? Of course not, right? So there was no state. Then what kind of society it was? It was simply a chiefdom society, and the king was leading. Rajan was leading. Why? Because he is nothing but the ritual head or the religious head of the clan, right? And that fellow has been given something. Why? Because he has been given or nominated or given a powerful or important post, and that is why a specific kind of thing or respect was given to him, right? And basically what respect was given to him? That Bali, whenever they had this cattle raids, right? So after the cattle raids, they used to distribute the cows among them, right? So the maximum share was going to the king. That was the only authority or the right the king used to have, right? So that is the system which they had. So that is why we can say that the system was basically, the system or the society could be called as a chiefdom society, right? There was no as such notion of state, and somehow as the surplus is not present in the society, you can't even discuss a state, right? But there's something which is very confusing, that is regarding the organizations that could be seen in the Rigvedic society, that is Sabha, Samiti, Vidat and Gan. Yeah.
Why suddenly cow became so important that all the important terms were related to cow?
Because it was a pastoralist community.
Only milk was the source.
Only
Only milk was there.
that we can't say, because cow was not only used for milk, meat was also I mean they were trying to get the meat also from the cow. They used to eat the cow meat. That is a much controversial thing, but even though it has been proved that they used to, and I just told you गोघन, guest, क्यों बोलते थे? कोई गेस्ट आया ना घर में, क्या करते थे? गाय को मार के उनको खिलाना पड़ता था, ठीक है? And that is why they are known as गोघन, right? So it was a pastoralist community, right? Animal husbandry or the cattle rearing was the most important profession to them, but it doesn't mean that it is the only profession or it was just because of milk, right? They used to produce something like wheat and barley. They are producing, na? I just told you, to limited extent agriculture. They had agriculture. सिर्फ आप दूध पी के जिंदा तो नहीं रह सकते ना. So what should be apart from cow, such as because they used to consume the cow meat and the cow milk. In that fashion, some other animal cannot be used. It is, I mean, they are not much aware of this or concerned of this, protein and some carbohydrate, right? So,
So the only reason was cow milk and cow meat.
yes, हम उसका उपयोग करते हैं. और कोई दूसरा एनिमल है जो उसके मुकाबले में खड़ा कर सकते हैं? बकरी दूध कम देती है, उतना देती नहीं है. नहीं, मटन में तो टेस्टी होता है, मटन तो टेस्टी होता है. Acha. Camel is not a animal which is being very normally used. It could be seen only in the desert areas. And have I ever referred you camel so far? No. Why? Because we haven't referred any such society which was living in the desert areas, right? So basically, whatever the societies we people are discussing, these were not the desert societies, and that is why they didn't know about camel. उनको पता है? Camel milk. No, that is what I am just telling you. For milk of the camel, first you need to know about camel. Right? If you don't know camel, how can you know about camel milk? दूध तो बहुत जाना, वो तो whale भी देती है, तो whale थोड़ी ना रख लेंगे यहाँ. ठीक है? So normally, look, I have already told you the process of domestication. It is not an easy process of domestication. Look, there are few animals. अब दूध तो हथनी भी देती है. तब हम थोड़ी इसका रख लेंगे, ठीक है? So it was not, so there were few animals which were actually, domesticated by them, right? So as they were domesticated by them, and they knew about that, and in fact, everything doesn't suit to human body. That is also important. And I just told you about that story regarding peanuts. बताया था ना मैंने? Peanuts. The things are not that much simple, right? It is not possible for our stomach to adjust everything or digest everything. ऊँट का दूध भी सबको नहीं पचता है, पता है ना आपको? और इट्स नॉट अबाउट पचता भी सबको डाइजेस्ट नहीं होगा. बकरी का दूध भी अगर आप पिएंगे तो सबको जल्दी डाइजेस्ट नहीं होगा. तो दैट इज इट इज ओनली द काउ मिल्क व्हिच इज डाइजेस्टेड बाय द ह्यूमन बॉडी वेरी और ह्यूमन स्टमक वेरी इजीली, राइट? ओके, राइट. So now these organizations, right? So these have been referred in Rig Veda. What were the significances of these? Sabha was basically a organization consisted the old and sort of some prosperous members of the clan, right? Old and prosperous members, right? So basically the old people and those who are some knowledgeable people, right? They were part of the Sabha, right? The Samiti was a small organization. Samiti was a small organization, right? That small organization which basically used to, take care of administration and other things, day-to-day administration, right? And finally, Vidata. Vidata is basically a general body or general assembly which included everyone, right? And we don't have much idea of Gana. So at least these three organizations were there. And in fact, as I told you that Samiti, which was the small body, which was playing very important role, right? And Sabha too was playing very important role. And in Vidata we'll find that everybody was actually a member of the Vidata, right? Now it has been discussed in a way in Rig Veda that actually these organizations or the institutions were there to control the arbitrary behavior of the king. Now again I remind that fellow, Prem Chopra. Do you remember that dialogue? कौन सा डायलॉग था? नंगा नहाएगा खैर नहीं छोड़ेगा खैर. ठीक है? Look, I just told you the positive and creative, everything is revolving around surplus. If the surplus is not there, what kind of arbitrary king you are talking about? There is no point of talking about this arbitrary king. He is not having any power, neither the money power nor the army power, right? So what kind of power you are talking about? I don't know then what was the point of having such kind of organizations. Maybe that these organizations were very much symbolic, right? And practically they did not used to exist, right? There might be a possibility. But as I told you, we have certain limitations and we have to always keep in mind those limitations. As Rig Veda is the only source to know about the Rig Vedic society, so we can't discuss anything. So more or less we can say this is the polity that we had during the early Vedic period, and I think very easily you can understand this is a very primitive form of the political structure. And in fact you need to discuss about, like if you are answering this question, you need to discuss about king, you need to discuss about territory, taxation, army, legitimacy. And I just told you he was the religious head, sort of, right? And that kind of legitimacy he had. And the another legitimacy that he was leading the clan in the cattle raids, right? And that is why he was legitimized as the head of the clan. And that is why we can simply use the term the chief rather than Rajan. But this term has been used, so we can talk about that term, but somehow he was not Rajan in real sense. He was more like a chief of the clan nothing else that we can discuss. Clear? So that kind of polity they had, right? But if we'll come to the later Vedic period, now the scenario got changed, right? So now in what way the scenario got changed? The first, that Rajan is again being used by them, but now that Rajan has changed its meaning and concept. Initially when we talked about Rajan, so I just told you that that word itself is not fit in the Rig Vedic society or Rig Vedic polity. But once we enter into the later Vedic period, now we can discuss some of the things, and that's the reason that I first discuss economy. And when I discuss economy, I just told you that definitely they had a better agriculture in this particular period. So once they had a better agriculture, it means that to some extent they had surplus. And if little bit surplus is there, so if little bit surplus is there, even though there were some sections in society those who were trying to grab the surplus from you, right? But this is also important to what amount you have the surplus, right? So somehow we can say limited surplus was present in the later Vedic period, and even though the impact of that limited surplus could be noticed over the society or the polity, right? So Rajan is there, fine, but now it is not only the people, land has also become important, right? Because now you know about some of the land such as Panchal, Kuru. Now once you are referring those terms Panchal and Kuru, so it is not about people but it is about the area. Kurukshetra you do know, Panchal you do know, right? So now it is the clans got affiliated with land, territory. अब हम बोलते हैं कि ये clan, जब हम बोलेंगे पांचाल, तो the first thing which comes into the mind, that is the land Panchal, not the tribal community Panchal. Getting my point or not? Right. So now the territory has become important, and that is why we find the terms like Janpada and all. Right. And I think there is a very simple reason because of what the land is becoming important. So far, their agriculture was limited, and they were normally cultivating in the courtyards, right? But now they have cleared the land, and you just imagine yourself putting in the same position that you are a person, you don't have very advanced tools and weapons and some other things, right? Even though you cleared the land to cultivate it, so do you imagine of do you think of even leaving that land on what you have worked very hard? Of course not. ठीक है, आपने वो जमीन साफ की है, ठीक है, आपने उस पर खेती किया है, आपको उस लैंड से एक अफिलिएशन डेवलप होता है, ठीक है, बट लैंड से अफिलिएशन तो है, बट लैंड से अफिलिएशन होने का ये मतलब नहीं है कि जो है प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी का कंसेप्ट आ गया. लैंड से अफिलिएशन के बाद जो नेक्स्ट कंसेप्ट है जहां पे हम पहुंचते हैं, राइट, द नेक्स्ट कंसेप्ट वेयर वी आर नाउ लैंडिंग, दैट इज कम्युनल प्रॉपर्टी, राइट. So there's another important thing that you always keep in mind कि in later Vedic period there was a concept of communal property. मतलब the whole community is owning the land rather than any individual. So I think still all those circumstances haven't come, right? Because until and unless the notion of private property comes, right? If that if this particular tab, right, is belonging to everyone in the class, right? So definitely we'll share the tab, right? But if it is belonging to me only, I won't share it with anyone, right? So if I'm not sharing with anyone, in that case only Tutul is coming to snatch it from me. Getting my point or not? I'm just joking, right? So, and if it is a communal property, so nobody can snatch it from me, because you may ask for using it, right? Okay, just give it to me for sometimes, I'll use it. But in that case, what actually I'm trying to convey, the negative aspects won't come into the society. To some extent it will come, right? But we won't find the real threat to the real threat to our property is coming, right? And that is why you have to keep in mind, and I think this is the best word that I can say, that this is nothing but the transformational phase. Getting my point, right? चीजें बेहतर हो रही हैं, ठीक है? Things are getting better, right? But it doesn't mean that the state system has come, but definitely this phase could be called as transitional phase, and that is the word. You just note down this word whenever you are writing anything about further later Vedic period. You have to use the word transitional, right? That is actually revealing the right nature of the phase, right? So now what is happening, that this phase somehow to some extent, right, we can say, suppose we are talking about the later Vedic period, right? So we can say Rajan is there, And of course that Rajan is, to some extent we can say, this Rajan is in a real sense. I mean, this Rajan is existing in a real sense. Why? Because now he is a Rajan of a territory, right? To some extent, we can say to some extent, right? Because all those conditions are not being fulfilled, right? And that is why Rajan, at least this term itself is having certain meaning. Now we can't call it chief because he is not simply a chief, right? So basically we can say that definitely he is a ruler of a territory, but that territory doesn't belong to any individual or Rajan, because that fellow is not completely owning the land. Because I hope you must be knowing this idea that this debate is also in is very popular. That is the king owner of the land? And I'll come to that point at a particular moment, because another thing which is very important, that you need to know that the king is collecting tax or rent. This is also very important, and I hope you do understand the difference between tax or rent. Getting my point or not? If I am collecting rent, it means I am owning the property, and if I am collecting tax, it means I am providing certain services to you, and that is why I am collecting tax, right? So that's always that used to be a big controversy in Indian history, that the king used to collect the tax or rent. We don't know that, and in fact there is no any confirmed answer for that, and we'll discuss. That's a debate I actually will discuss during this Gupta period. What kind of rights developed over the land, private ownership or some other things, right? So somehow at least one thing that we can say, definitely the territory is there, but the private ownership is not there. Rather we can say communal ownership is there. So that's the right term, communal ownership, right? And if it is communal ownership, it means that the king with the other fellows, right? The king with the other fellows owning the land, right? Sharing it, right? And that is why we can say it was, it was the next label, but definitely not the. Now what we are supposed to discuss? Tax. Bali has still been referred, right? So Bali, the only thing we can say, the Bali was more regularized as compared to the previous phase, but Bali hasn't become tax. Only you need to remember, right? How come it was regularized? We find that certain provisions have been mentioned where they are trying to compel the people to give something to them, right? But people, they are not very adamant, right? And people are also not willing to give very regularly something to the king, right? Because ultimately, whatever the property, property is there for that particular, clan, that is being shared by all of them, right? So in such a case, we don't find that there was any use of Bali. But yes, they tried to regularize the Bali. And finally, army. Ultimately, if all those things are not there, there was no point of discussing army also. So if army is also not there, so now definitely it could be said that it was nothing but a transitional phase, right? So neither you keep it in the chiefdom society, nor you can keep this age into a state society. Both the things are missing here. But yes, it had the at least trend to be into or convert itself into a state society, but all the features were not present, right? And here, as the king is slightly trying to become powerful, and that is why we'll find that Sabha and Samiti are definitely there, but Gana and Vidatha, where we find the participation of most of the people, that has lost now, right? That has lost now. And at the same time, as these are losing their power, and at the same time we'll find certain other terms are coming into existence, such as Sangrahita, and Bhagaduta. What are these Sangrahita and Bhagaduta? Sangrahita was the collector of Bali, and Bhagaduta was the finance minister, right? So if these terms have been referred, so at least we can assume that they are moving towards that direction. The person who is a specific person or an individual has been appointed to that post. It means that these kind of functions now have come into the society, and that is where some specific kind of person has been appointed. So more or less we can say that only word that could define the nature of the polity of the later Vedic period is transitional or transition, nothing else. Neither you call it chiefdom society, nor we call it the state society. So somewhere it was lying in between, right? So that was the later Vedic polity. I think now you have come to that stage where you can deal with such kind of thing. If any question is coming on polity, so I hope you can understand what are the terms that must be discussed by you.
Sir, function of these two, Sangrahita and
I just told you na, Sangrahita was the collector of Bali. Tax nahi likhna hai. Be very particular about the terms, right? So the collector of the Bali, and that next fellow Bhagaduta was the finance minister, right? So somebody was there to manage the income of the state, right? To what extent they are real, I don't know that. And in fact we are completely relying on the rest of the Vedas. So we can, definitely it is tough to be said, but somehow I think the meanings are very clear, right? So that is the comparative study of the polity of early Vedic and later Vedic period. And mind you, this much information is more than sufficient to write any answer which is coming in your examination, right? Any question which is coming in your examination, because ultimately this is the concept around which you have to deal with it. Nothing is there. There's nothing as such could be discussed, right? Until and unless you are doing some intense research on Vedic polity, right? तब तो फिर बहुत कुछ हो सकता है, शायद मेरी information भी कम हो, बहुत कम हो, ठीक है? That's a different thing, right? But I hope you got the concept that this is the nature of state, and this is chiefdom society I have already discussed. So the chiefdom society is state society, chiefdom society transitional phase, and next would be state, Mahajanpada, right? So it's a gradual transformation, right, that we can notice. So that is why some people have always this, actually this is also a good style. Instead of, studying the polity, society, religion and, some other things together, what they do actually, they only study the polity. But there is a problem over there, right? Try to get my point. What is the problem? If you are studying only the polity, as I told you, without economy, do you think it is possible to understand the polity of early Vedic or later Vedic period? No, it won't be possible. And when we are trying to, when we'll be trying to cover or understand the religion and society without knowing about their polity and their, economy, we won't be able to understand their. And that is why I preferred this style, right? Where we can understand, we can relate it with the economy, we can relate it with the society, right? Until and unless you are doing this, the holistic approach won't be developed. Right? So I think now at least once you have studied the polity and the economy, you can link it with that, and without linking it the polity with economy, there's definitely you won't be able to prove your ideas dominantly, right? So that's all about that polity, right? So now we are left with society and religion, right? So that we'll be doing in the next class, right? So we'll cover this polity and woe. And then, when we'll discuss about society, there were some minor terms also, right? In society, it should be society is slightly complex, because in society, we need to understand some minor terms, such as vis itself is a term. Varna. So Varna, it is not only about these 4 Varnas, okay, the 4 Varnas were there, hum yaad ho gaya aur hamara kaam ho gaya na. We have to understand the Varna as a historical process, right? So that is our task, right? So there I'll just dictate some of the things, right? So there, whenever the things are required, like I'll dictate you. So I'm just giving you a holistic idea, and then it will be easy for you to understand also, and to produce it in the answer script also, right? So I'll first finish this, society and religion in the next class, and then we'll start catching those things, right? Which are actually the minor things like vis, Varna, the ashram system, and some like Upanishads, Aranyakas, their philosophy. So we'll cover in that way only now, right? So something which is there like the Vedas as a source, and these kind of details have been given in your notes, so you can just supplement it, with that, and some extra information in written format I'll get you. I'll just dictate some of the parts, right? Okay.